On May 4, 2024 in Florida, it's a crisp autumn morning when the protagonist, Clara, steps out of her apartment, feeling the cool air brush against her face. She's dressed in her usual outfit, a soft, navy blue coat that's starting to fray at the cuffs, paired with a pair of worn leather boots that have been with her through countless seasons. In her hand, she clutches her phone and wallet, the essentials for her day ahead. A slight weight in her bag catches her attention, though, an envelope she received the day before. It's an invitation to a job interview, one she'd almost forgotten about. She'd tossed it in her bag absent-mindedly, thinking it was just another routine opportunity, nothing that would change her path. As Clara makes her way through the city streets, the world seems quiet and familiar. The same busyness of commuters, the same sounds of people talking and traffic whizzing by. She's walking the same path she's walked for years, unaware that with each step, she's moving toward a moment that will forever alter the course of her life. The decision to attend the interview, a simple one she made the night before, will prove to be the first in a series of events that will unravel the life she's known. She doesn't realize it yet, but in that small, almost imperceptible action of slipping the envelope into her bag, she has set into motion a chain of events that will soon force her to question everything she thought she knew about herself and the world around her. This morning, like any other, may be the last time she feels completely in control of her own life. Clara settles into a corner booth of the cafe, still mulling over the meeting she'd just left. She unpacks her bag slowly, placing her phone on the table and flicking through her messages, but a feeling she can't place begins to creep in. At first, it's subtle, an uneasy flutter in her chest, an almost imperceptible sensation that something's off. The barista gives her an unusually long, almost cautious look when handing over her cappuccino. She doesn't think much of it until she notices a couple of people at a nearby table exchanging quick, quiet glances, their conversation halting for a brief moment when they notice her. She tries to shake it off, assuming it's her own nervous energy, but the sense of being observed continues to grow. As she takes a sip of her coffee, a woman sitting by the window shifts uncomfortably in her seat, glancing over at Clara before hastily looking down at her phone. Clara's eyes flicker around the room, but no one seems to meet her gaze directly anymore. The whispers, though soft, seem louder now, charged with meaning she can't quite understand. The hum of the cafe, once familiar, feels oppressive, as if everyone knows something she doesn't. The unease settles deeper as Clara becomes increasingly aware of the tension hanging in the air. She reaches for her wallet in her bag, but her fingers tremble. She wonders if she's overreacting, but the more she tries to ignore it, the more obvious the weight of the moment becomes. Something is wrong. She feels eyes on her from every corner of the cafe, but when she turns to look, no one is watching. They're only watching her when she isn't looking. The realization strikes her that whatever this is, it's deliberate, and she has no idea why. Clara's fingers twitch around the handle of her coffee cup as she scans the cafe once again, trying to calm her mounting anxiety. The hum of conversation seems to fade into a blur as she focuses on the subtle shift in the atmosphere. Then, without warning, the door to the back office opens, and a figure steps out, a man in his mid-40s, wearing a tailored suit that fits him perfectly. His hair is neatly combed, and his expression is the kind of calm professionalism that often commands attention. It's the manager, and he's walking directly toward her. For a brief moment, Clara freezes. She doesn't know why, but the moment he steps into her line of sight, something in the pit of her stomach churns. She shifts uncomfortably, watching him approach. His eyes lock with hers, and there's an unsettling familiarity in the way he looks at her, like he's seen her before, or like he knows something she doesn't. The others in the cafe seem to fade into the background as he stops in front of her. "Clara," he says, his voice smooth, but there's a sharpness underneath. "Mind if we have a word?" She opens her mouth, but the words don't come out. Her heart is pounding in her chest, and for a moment, she wonders if she's somehow been caught in a bad dream. She's done nothing wrong, has she? She forces a tight smile, though her voice trembles as she speaks. "Of course. Is everything all right?" The manager doesn't return the smile. He pulls a small tablet from his pocket, the screen lighting up with a few swipes of his finger. He slides it toward her, and there, staring back at her from the screen, is her name, Clara Ford, but the document beneath it doesn't match anything she's seen before. The signature is different. The details don't align with the ID she'd been using. The discomfort she felt earlier shifts into something far darker. Her mind races. How did he know? How could he have found out? I've been going over some of the information you provided us, the manager continues, his eyes not leaving hers. There's a discrepancy with your identification documents. His words hang in the air like a quiet threat. You didn't think we'd check. Clara's heart skips a beat. She tries to keep her voice steady, but it cracks, betraying her. I'm not sure what you mean. There must be some mistake. The manager's expression remains impassive, but there's a glint of something darker in his eyes now. I'm afraid it's no mistake, Clara. His tone grows colder. The name you're using doesn't match anything in our system. The address, the history, it's all fabricated. Her breath catches in her throat, and she feels the room close in around her. The faces in the cafe seem to blur as the realization hits her. She's been caught. Everything she's done, everything she's worked so hard to keep hidden, is suddenly unraveling in front of her. The calm facade she's been trying to maintain crumbles, replaced by a sharp spike of panic. I can explain, Clara stammers, trying to buy herself some time, trying to figure out how to salvage this. But she knows it's too late for excuses. The evidence is right there on the tablet. The manager leans in closer, his voice dropping to a low, almost conspiratorial whisper. You've been living under a false identity for quite some time, haven't you? And I'm sure you didn't think we'd notice. But you're not the first to try this, and you won't be the last. He straightens up, his gaze never wavering. But you're the one I'm dealing with right now. The tension in the air thickens, and Clara feels a bead of sweat form at the back of her neck. She tries to maintain composure, but the cracks in her confidence are widening by the second. She's caught, and she knows it. I didn't mean, Clara starts, but her voice falters. There's no point in denying it now. The false identity she's been living under, the carefully crafted lie that has shaped her life, is exposed. Her fingers curl into the fabric of her coat as she shifts in her seat, every instinct screaming at her to run, to leave, but she can't. She's trapped in this moment. The manager's lips curl into a thin smile, but it doesn't reach his eyes. You can explain all you want, but that's not why I'm here. You know what happens when things don't add up. The question is, Clara, what are you going to do now? Her mind races as she tries to think of a way out, but the more she struggles, the more the walls close in. The confrontation, once a distant fear, has arrived with a force she didn't expect. The world around her has shifted, and the calm life she thought she was leading has been thrown into chaos. This is the beginning of something far bigger than she could have ever imagined, and as the manager's eyes pierce into her, she realizes that this is only the start of the conflict. Clara's heart pounds in her chest, and a sense of panic rises sharply within her. The manager's cold, calculated words hang in the air like a threat. There's no way out through reason. This is no longer a simple misunderstanding. She can feel the walls closing in as his gaze remains locked on her, his silence almost as menacing as his words. The realization settles in that her situation won't resolve with a few words. The decision she's made, the false identity, the documents, has led to this moment, and there's no turning back. Clara's breath catches, her thoughts racing. The room feels smaller, the quiet conversations around her muted. She knows she's being cornered. With a sharp intake of breath, Clara makes her choice. She has to leave before this situation spirals further. Her fingers tremble as she stands up quickly, her movements swift but calculated. The manager's eyes follow her, and his lips curl into a slight, almost smug smile. He doesn't stop her. Clara grabs her bag, slinging it over her shoulder as she walks briskly toward the door, her mind spinning. The moment she steps outside, a wave of cold air hits her, and she exhales, trying to steady herself. She hurries down the street, her footsteps echoing in the quiet morning. The weight of the decision to walk away lingers in the pit of her stomach. She's escaped for now, but she knows that the storm is far from over. The relief of getting out is fleeting, replaced quickly by the gnawing fear that the consequences are just beginning. Her phone buzzes in her pocket, and her pulse spikes as she reads the message that appears. "We know where you are. We'll be in touch." The familiar feeling of dread floods her chest again, confirming that this is far from over. She doesn't have much time before the next confrontation comes. But for now, leaving was the only choice she could make. As Clara disappears out the door, the tension in the cafe lingers in the air, thick and palpable. The manager remains at the counter, his expression unreadable as he watches her retreating form. The soft murmur of conversation slowly begins to pick up again, but the atmosphere has changed. What was once a casual, almost forgettable setting now feels charged with the residue of the confrontation. A few regulars glance at each other, unsure of what to make of the scene that just unfolded. The barista, who had been caught in the middle of the awkward exchange, leans against the counter, his gaze drifting to the empty spot where Clara had been sitting. His face is etched with uncertainty. "Do you think she was guilty, or was she just in over her head?" he asks, his voice barely above a whisper. One of the older customers, a man in his 50s with a tired, weathered face, gives a slow shake of his head. "I don't know about all that. She didn't seem like the type to be up to no good. But rules are rules." He shrugs, eyes flickering back to the door Clara had exited through. Maybe she got caught up in something she shouldn't have. Another woman, a young professional sitting by the window, looks up from her phone. She's overheard the conversation, and her eyes narrow with a hint of judgment. I don't care what kind of confusion she was in. That manager had every right to call her out. You can't just go around using fake IDs, no matter the reason. She folds her arms across her chest, her tone firm. She got off easy, honestly. The debate grows, splitting the cafe into quiet factions, each one with their own interpretation of what had happened. The older man and a few others seem sympathetic to Clara's plight, speculating that she might have been coerced or manipulated into using false documents. She didn't look like someone who would intentionally deceive anyone, he adds, glancing around at the others. Maybe she got caught in something bigger than we know. Maybe she didn't even have a choice. A young woman, who has been quietly sipping her coffee, shakes her head in disagreement. If she was coerced, she should have just walked away from whatever it was. But she didn't. She chose to lie, and now she has to face the consequences. Her eyes flicker toward the manager, who remains behind the counter, silently observing the unfolding conversation. In the corner of the cafe, a couple of people who were sitting in the back booth exchange murmured comments, having witnessed the entire ordeal. It felt like she was just running from something, one of them says, the words dripping with a quiet sympathy. But then again, who knows? She could have been hiding something dark. Another person counters, his voice more certain. She had the chance to come clean. She didn't. And now she's left us all wondering. I'm not about to make excuses for her. As the discussion grows, the cafe is divided into two main perspectives. Those who feel sympathy for Clara and believe there's more to the story, and those who see her as a figure who got caught in a mistake, unable to avoid the consequences of her actions. This division is subtle but growing, as the whispers and side conversations begin to take on an air of judgment. It becomes clear that the manager's decision will be seen through different lenses, depending on where you stand. From behind the counter, the manager watches the exchanges unfold with a calculating eye. He doesn't join in on the conversation, but his presence looms over the room, a reminder of the power dynamics at play. His decision to confront Clara and expose the truth of her identity has already started to shape the narrative. People will talk, and the story will spread. Outside, the world continues on, oblivious to the small drama unfolding within the cafe. But inside, the seeds of public opinion are being sown. How Clara is remembered will depend not only on what she did, but on how people choose to interpret it. The fault lines are already forming, and the outcome of this division will shape the way the situation is discussed and understood in the days to come. The once quiet cafe now buzzes with speculation, each person holding on to their own version of the truth, each conversation adding layers to the story. And with every whispered word and exchanged look, Clara's fate seems to slip further away from her control. Clara walks through the quiet streets, the cold wind sharp against her skin, but it's the chaos in her mind that hurts the most. She replays the confrontation over and over, trying to make sense of it, but it's like a puzzle with too many missing pieces. She thought she had control, thought she was making a decision that would secure her future, but now the weight of her choices feels unbearable. The fear of being exposed, the guilt of her lies, it all threatens to swallow her whole. She pulls out her phone, scrolling through her contacts with trembling fingers. Who can I turn to? She thinks of her family, but the thought of their disappointment is too much. Her friends, they might judge her, question her decisions. But I can't face this alone. She finally taps Sarah's name and dials her number. The phone rings, each second stretching into eternity. Clara. Sarah's voice is full of concern. What's going on? Clara's voice cracks as she speaks, the floodgates of emotion opening. I've made a huge mistake, she admits. Everything's falling apart. I don't know what to do anymore. There's a pause before Sarah responds, her voice calm but understanding. You're not alone in this, Clara. Whatever it is, we'll get through it together. Clara feels a wave of relief wash over her, the weight in her chest lightening just slightly. She talks more, telling Sarah everything, the words spilling out in a rush. The more she speaks, the clearer it becomes. She's not alone. She doesn't have to solve this by herself. Sarah doesn't have all the answers, but her steady presence is enough. Thank you, Clara whispers, her voice filled with gratitude. I needed that. You don't have to do this alone, Sarah reassures her. You'll figure it out. With Sarah's support and the clarity beginning to form, Clara takes a deep breath. She knows it won't be easy, and the road ahead is uncertain, but for the first time in days, she feels like she might be able to face the consequences and find a way forward. The incident spreads like wildfire across social media. Clara's confrontation is captured in a grainy video, and soon it's everywhere. Users dissect the footage, turning her personal crisis into a topic of heated debate. Some show understanding, suggesting that her actions might have been driven by desperation or circumstance. Maybe she was just trying to survive. One comment reads, "We don't know her full story." These supporters argue that everyone makes mistakes, especially under pressure, and that Clara didn't deserve the harsh spotlight. However, others take a more judgmental stance. She knowingly broke the law, another user writes. Fake documents are no small thing. She should be held accountable. The backlash grows, with many calling her actions reckless and irresponsible. People accuse her of putting others at risk and undermining trust in the system. Clara watches, helpless, as the opinions flood in. Her phone vibrates constantly with notifications. Friends and family reach out, some offering support, others expressing concern or disappointment. The weight of public scrutiny presses on her, amplifying her anxiety and confusion. She tries to find solace in the kind comments, but struggles to ignore the cruel remarks that sting like daggers. To make matters worse, the story reaches news outlets, framing her as a cautionary tale. Headlines like "Local Woman's Fake ID Scandal Goes Viral, Mock Her Mistake," and the accompanying articles further distort her intentions, focusing on the scandal rather than her struggles. The media storm forces Clara to confront a painful truth. She is no longer just the person who made a mistake, but the subject of a public spectacle. Unable to escape the relentless attention, Clara posts a statement on social media, explaining her actions. I made a terrible decision, "One I deeply regret," she writes. "But I am trying to move forward, to fix the mess I've made." The response is mixed. Some people appreciate her honesty, but many are quick to dismiss her apology as self-serving. Clara realizes, with a sinking heart, that no matter what she says, the judgment has already been passed. The public narrative of her life is now out of her hands. Rather than letting shame or anger consume her, Clara chooses to take a proactive step. She decides to confront the broader issues that led to her mistake and channel her energy into raising awareness. Clara reaches out to several organizations focused on social justice, particularly those that advocate for individuals facing financial or systemic struggles. She shares her experience, explaining how economic pressures and limited choices led her to use false documents. Her aim is not to excuse her actions, but to bring attention to the broader challenges people like her face. She receives a response from a non-profit group focused on economic justice, inviting her to speak about her situation in a public forum. Clara begins attending meetings, where she learns more about the policies and systemic barriers that cause people to resort to desperate measures. She's encouraged to share her story in interviews and articles, shedding light on how societal pressures often force individuals into moral gray areas. The response from the public is mixed, but Clara feels empowered. She no longer feels like a victim of her mistake, but an advocate for those whose voices often go unheard. By choosing to speak out, Clara reclaims control over her narrative. She channels her experience into a call for reform, advocating for more understanding, compassion, and support for those in similar situations. Through this, Clara transforms her personal crisis into a movement that highlights the need for a more compassionate society. Clara chooses to use the aftermath of the incident as a platform for change. Rather than hide in shame or bitterness, she speaks openly about her experience, joining public discussions and forums to raise awareness of the pressures that led her to make her mistake. She participates in podcasts, panel discussions, and even a series of community talks, where she directly addresses the systemic issues that affect people like her, those forced to bend the rules out of necessity. In one powerful speech, Clara says, "I'm not proud of what I did, but I can't pretend it was just a simple mistake. I want to use my story to show that we need better systems of support, better opportunities for people in tough situations." Her vulnerability resonates with many, and soon Clara becomes an advocate for legal and social reform, working with nonprofits that focus on providing support to marginalized individuals. As her advocacy grows, Clara finds herself increasingly confident in her mission. She meets with others who have faced similar struggles, forming a network of voices calling for change. While some still judge her for her past, Clara no longer feels defined by her mistake. Her journey of self-forgiveness and action becomes her true legacy, a reminder that mistakes can lead to growth, and personal accountability can spark broader societal change. If you find this story interesting and filled with meaningful lessons, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to learn more valuable lessons.